The Honourable Member for Brome-Missisquoi. Mr. Speaker, first off, I wanted to say that this matter is of great importance for all creators, specifically those in my riding, in Sutton, in Magog, in Bromont, in Coiville, etc. I'd also like to focus on the fact that artists really do improve the lives of Canadians, whether they're in the various fields of the arts, whether in cinema, music, etc. Artists are entitled to being paid fairly for their performance. We're looking at millions of dollars in revenues lost to artists.
There is a complex list of exceptions that do not recognize the rights of creators. In fact, Mr. Speaker, these exceptions create new means by which consumers can have access to protected content without creating new ways for the creators to be remunerated for the fair use of their work. The bill, C-11, does not sufficiently protect the capacity of people to display the works by artists themselves, even if it would be easy to authorize it collectively. Third, Bill C-11 creates an artificial distinction between a private use copy and reproduction for private uses in Part 8 of the Copyright Act compared to Section 29.22 on modernization of the Copyright Act, which is proposed. Also, with regard to consumers, there are direct impacts. There are provisions, which means that some rights have precedence over others. Bill C-11 could mean that you would no longer have access to content for which you have already paid and that you are entitled to use. For example, if you do distance studies, they would ask you to destroy your notes at the end of the course, as this bill has set out. So for all those reasons, we find that we have to create other ways for creators to be helped by preventing access to works by authors. There are fines of over $1 million and 5 years in prison, along with a corollary with regard to digital lock protection. All this could create a situation where digital locks would have precedence over other rights, including the right for fair dealings for journalists. This is a problem. In particular, there is a very real danger of seeing some situations where consumers would not be authorized to use content for which they had already paid. Second, this would take precedence over other rights guaranteed under the Charter, such as a change of format or a case where somebody has a perceptual disability. Second, this would require in cases where there is a digital lock for copies made for study purposes be destroyed within 5 days, and that course notes be destroyed 30 days after the end of the course. This would cause serious problems for students who are taking distance courses, and it's not an appropriate use of the rules on copyright, Mr. Speaker. Third, this would create new limited exceptions to the provisions on fair dealings under the Copyright Act, including the exceptions for teachers and educational purposes. These same exceptions would not adequately recognize the rights of creators. In fact, these exceptions would facilitate the access by consumers to protected content under Copyright Act without ensuring new means to compensate the creators for their work. With this bill, the Conservatives are trying to avoid looking at the issue of a possible extension of the exception on private copies, a measure that was proposed by the NDP and a number of experts. Exceptions for copies have been very effective with regard to DVDs. The government is trying to appeal to the public in this regard. The NDP believes that it is high time to modernize the copyright rules, but this bill has too many major problems. In some cases, it would even create problems where there are none or were none previously. Try to amend the bill in order for it to better reflect the interests of Quebec and Canadians. The NDP believes that the rules on copyright in Canada can take a balanced approach between the rights of creators to be fairly compensated for their works and the rights of consumers to have access to content at reasonable costs. Finally, we will study all possible amendments that could be made to the bill in order to create a fair system of royalties for artists as currently exists, and the bill eliminates several millions of dollars in revenues for our artists. So for all those reasons, what we want in the NDP is that we believe that the efforts by Canadians to reform the Copyright Act have not resulted in a reform that strikes the right balance. This meets the demands of major American companies. When will Canadians have a legislation that meets their needs? In the NDP, we believe that Canadian copyright acts can strike the balance between the rights of creators to get fair compensation for their work, Mr. Speaker, and the rights of consumers to have reasonable access to content. We will assess all the amendments that can be proposed with regard to fair royalties for artists. As currently set out, there is several millions of dollars in revenues are being eliminated. So the Copyright Modernization Act takes with one hand and gives with the other. Even if there are some concessions in favor of consumers, they are undermined by the refusal of the government to adopt a compromise with regard to the most controversial issues, that is, with regard to copyrights in this country. We propose withdrawing the bill on the Copyright Modernization Act and with eliminating the provisions that are problematic. We support the reduction in penalties for those who are guilty and ensure that there will not be excessive recourse to the courts. The Conservatives have not listened to the opinion of experts who gave testimony before committees. They had their own consultations in 2009. They have now a bill that is more problematic than it is helpful. It's important to modernize the Copyright Act in a way that will eliminate these egregious issues, and we will work to amend the bill so that it better reflects the interests of all Canadians. So, in closing, Mr. Speaker, there are a number of groups who have put forward their ideas and supported what we have said, including the demands by the cultural industry, the Guild of Writers of Canada, and talking about the Canadian Writers Guild. The only option for Bill C-11 with regard to the digital is the digital lock, which prevents creators from being properly compensated and takes away from consumers the same rights that they are guaranteed under other sections of the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.